Welcome to the History of the Batman with Londyn, brought to you by Meltdown Comics and Collectibles in Hollywood, California. This is where we relive the defining moments of one of the most iconic figures in comic art and literature, the Batman. My name is Adam Silverstein, and as always, I am here with her Batness, Londyn. Also, from the shadows, this week we are joined by Shadow Adam. Londyn, how are you?
I'm good. It's been a good week. How about you?
Well, frankly, I'm just excited to get into some more history of the Batman with you. I've heard that you have a good topic planned for this week.
I think so, and I think what makes this week a little special for fans that do follow the main blog on Instagram.com/historyofthebatman, is that this topic I haven't really gone in depth with, or it hasn't been a Batman history session. So it's a little bit new for the new listeners and the old who have been following the account. And it's a really great topic, I think.
So the suspense is killing me, or probably I know what it is, but I want to talk about it. So you're going to be talking about the evolution of the Batarang.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, the Batarang is definitely a cool item. I mean, I think everyone associates the Batarang with Adam West, I was going to say, which I guess they kind of do that too.
Right.
So why don't you tell me then a little bit about what makes this Batarang so significant, or, you know. Well, actually, why don't you start with what is the Batarang?
Well, the Batarang, pretty much when it was created back in 1939 when Batman debuted, it was just a metal scallop-shaped object that was in the shape of a bat that matched the symbol, and it was kind of used as like a boomerang. When Gardner Fox and Bill Finger created it, that was their influence, and that's what the first panel says. It's like based off the Australian boomerang, and it's pretty much it's a weapon, and it's one of the most used, I think, probably in the thousands of issues that Batman has been featured in. The Batarang itself has been used countless times, and I think what's significant about the Batarang that people may just miss is that in no matter what media you go over, whether it's in comic books or it's in film or it's in television or even in video games, the Batarang is always there with Batman. It's a significant part of what makes him unique. I think that the Batarang, along with all the other gadgets that he has in his utility belt or, inside his cape, or however the writer or artist illustrate it, is that it's something that is man-made, and it shows, his intellect and his talent and what he brings to being the Caped Crusader that other heroes that he's alongside don't really do, because they have superpowers. Right. Superman can fly and has laser vision, and other people have super speed and super strength, whereas this object kind of takes away that aspect. It's kind of replacing superpowers. Right.
Well, it gives him a long range attack.
Right. And when it first was introduced, I mean, he was already going up against a supernatural opponent, which I always found was interesting.
Who was it?
He was called the Mad Monk, and he had supernatural powers, and that story was in the two-parter in Detective Comics, Volume 1, 31, from September of 1939.
Unbelievable how you know this stuff.
And it was called Batman versus the Vampire. And pretty much the story is at the time, Bruce Wayne had a fiance, and that's the first time we're introduced to Julie Madison. And she becomes hypnotized by the Mad Monk, and it turns into a whole journey of where Batman first encounters him and uses the Batarang, and that's the first time you see it, and he throws it at him, and then it comes back, but it doesn't really have an effect because this mad monk has kind of these superpowers and can transform into wolves and vampires and just everything that's so out of context of just, Batman fighting crooks in Gotham. It's one of the first stories that takes Batman outside of the city that he protects, and they pretty much go to Hungary and they fly in the Batplane. So he's using this Batarang, which is pretty much almost like a ninja star, but in a boomerang fashion. And he has to not only fight the Mad Monk, but in part 2, in issue 32, he is trapped in a den of werewolves, and the only way to get out is if he pulls himself up out of the pit, and you see him use the Batarang, pretty much attach a rope to it, swing it at the edge, and then he pulls himself out of the pit. I mean, he pretty much uses the Batarang to escape werewolves,
Right.
and he uses it to fight this huge ape, and he uses it just to against these characters and these creatures that are kind of out of his realm.
Right.
But it's a simple, man-made tool that he uses, and he, defeats his opponent and he wins in the end.
So did the Batarang... So when he was trying to escape the wolves, did he actually attach the rope to the Batarang?
Yes,
And then did eventually he get a grappling hook, or was it a Batarang with a cord attached to it?
Well, it would depend on the situation. Sometimes he would throw the Batarang at whoever, or would throw it at whatever target he was aiming at. It could be a target as if he wanted to hit a button that's across the room, and he would throw it, it would hit the button. His accuracy, of course, is perfect, and it would come back.
Years of training.
Years of training. And you really just see in the 40s and the 50s the Batarang as just pretty much one of those, he throws it at whatever target is really he's aiming for, and then it comes back to him. And the boomerang effect only really lasts for about maybe the first 20 years, for the 40s and the 50s, the Silver Age. And you get to actually see the Batarang in a bigger, sense in Detective Comics 244, which is in 1957. And the cover art, which was by Sheldon Moldoff, it's called The 100 Batarangs of the Batman. So
that's the title of
That's the title of the comic. That's the title of the story, the main story, because in Detective Comics there are about 4 stories, but the very first one is always a Batman story.
Okay.
So the other issues would be, either whichever different hero or, different stories. But usually with Detective Comics, Batman was the headliner. So on the cover, that's what you saw. And you see Batman and a wall of Batarangs. And since this is in, the late 50s and it's in the Silver Age era, which shows, a lot of, bright and lighthearted, stories and tales, and it's not as dark as it was in the 1940s, when he was this, massive vigilante, pulp figure. The storyline itself and the art is just, very bright and light. And you see this wall of Batarangs, and they're different. There's one that is a magnet Batarang, and then one that's the seeing eye Batarang.
So real quick, before that issue,
right,
it had only been a boomerang type weapon. And so that 100. So who created that concept of the multiple?
Well, Bill Finger and Gardner Fox were the first to design it, but then as it continued, and especially with the stories, it would really depend on how the story is, but for the most part, it was an object that it would either be by itself, and it would be thrown, and it's either to an opponent or to a certain target where it needs to hit, and then it comes back.
Right.
Or if he needed to grapple, it was kind of like before the grappling gun, which came out in the late 80s.
So then this Detective Comics issue changed all that.
This issue expanded upon, pretty much that the Batarang, however he makes a Batarang for whatever situation he's in. And I think that's what is so interesting about this object, because, he has all these different types of tech and things like that, but he pretty much makes anything with the Batarang to help him in the certain situation.
Let me ask you this.
Sure.
Does he prepare certain Batarangs for certain situations that he knows he's going to face? For example, I mean, maybe he's fighting a specific villain and then has to create a Batarang to especially combat.
Pretty much. And I mean, you don't get to see the actual creation usually in the comics. It's usually if he's facing some creature or some random crook that has a certain, scheme, he'll just say, oh, well, I have my trusty so-and-so Batarang.
Right.
You don't get to see him make it, but he just, of course, automatically has it. And at times, you can either see him take it out of his utility belt or you can see it take him out of his cape. And I guess the thing is, he has multiple. He has tons. It's endless.
He's never has just one.
He's never has just one. And even though, we're talking about the 40s and 50s and kind of the early times, I mean, later, even in comics, in a Teen Titans issue that was probably in the early 2000s, I mean, one of the Robins, Tim Drake, he notes that the Batarang budget is really high. So it's just, there's more to it than just, it's just a simple weapon because he uses it all the time. And I think that's why people kind of just pass it because it's something so common, in all of the issues. But if you look at the different ways that it's been used, it's really important.
Yeah.
And pretty much throughout the Silver Age, the use has been the same. And I think once we get to the 80s, that's when it changes. And that's actually seen in Frank Miller's Batman: The Dark Knight Returns with Klaus Janson as artist. And it came out in 1986. And in that series, he pretty much created a grappling gun that had the bat symbol on the end of the gun. And he would use it to, grapple up buildings or even to shoot it at opponents. And that kind of took away the just Batarang and rope dynamic. It became something more technical. It's not a gun, it's a grappling gun, but the symbol of the Batarang is pretty much attached to it. So that actually came in the late 80s. And it's pretty much, if you look at it in comics, it depends on the writer and the artist, but the symbol is simple. It's just the bat, whatever the bat emblem that's on his chest is, that's the shape of it. But
so has he ever had a different shaped Batarang from the emblem? Or do you know?
Mostly, especially when we start talking about live action, it's pretty much whatever the symbol is on his chest, that is like the exact, Batarang shape. Even in the I think probably besides, the 1950s where the emblem was kind of in like a squished kind of bat symbol, like the wings are kind of at a weird angle. And so dynamically, throwing it, he might have had to make it a little bit larger. It's more scalloped than just kind of squished. Other than that, once the 80s came and Miller, introduced the grappling gun, and the films pretty much did the same thing. They kind of took the shape of whatever his emblem was and would match.
And that's one of the things you told me earlier off the air, is that with regards to all the media that Batman is portrayed in, the Batarang is a consistent thing.
Exactly.
And so you've got actually a little bit to talk about with regards to the film, television, comics, etc. Let me ask you this before we get there, though.
Okay.
Have you ever seen any blueprints or internal workings of the Batarang? Is that available? Do you know of that? Because I know with Marvel, they used the Marvel handbook, the Who's Who. DC did one, and they would break down.
Right.
And I know I saw a diagram of Spider-Man's web shooter.
Oh, his web shooter.
But
okay.
I wondered if they'd ever made a Batarang.
I'm actually a huge fan of the Who's Who's, and I've collected them for a while. And with Batman, they did his utility belt, and they kind of broke it down that way, and the Batarang was included. But the actual workings of it wasn't really there. But it's pretty much until probably the 90s, and when we get to live action and animation, that it was just a metal object. There wasn't really any inner workings. It's almost like it was sculpted just as, a tool.
Makes sense.
It wasn't there wasn't any inner workings in it. So I think later, when you see like the electric one and the razor one and all those when they kind of, develop the Batarang and more to just throwing.
Right, they add the tech.
Right, when they add the tech, then it would be interesting to see if someone would do a blueprint of it. But as I know, they don't. Okay. They don't really focus on it.
All right. Well, hey, some people may want to build their own Batarang.
Right, and people have.
Oh, yeah.
But people have made it out of different material. I mean, there's someone that made about a 20-foot Batarang, but it's all in wood. Wow. I mean, that's why I think the Batarang's so cool. I mean, people are making their own Batarangs, even though they're not going to use it, hopefully, on anybody or anything. Just the fascination of that's Batman's weapon. I mean, it has bat in it, and that's pretty much what anything. The Batmobile and the Batcave, and the Batplane and the Batboat, and all of the long list of, bat names that I think the 1966 series kind of really pushed. Everything was bat, whatever it is.
Right.
But the Batarang is so commonplace, yet it's had a very interesting designer's history.
Yeah, well, it sounds pretty awesome. So why do you think that, I mean, other than the utility belt in which it can be found,
right?
Why do you think that surpassed any other utility that he had on his belt or any other item?
Well, it's interesting because it just seems like, because of course in most comics, he doesn't use any other weapons and he doesn't have any other powers. And I think just that the Batarang enough is just a symbol of not only that, he built it and his idea of it, but it also shows his, almost physical perfection in how it can be used as almost a, distraction to opponents. It's not just thrown at them at their, arm or their leg or the body. It's more, it can be thrown as a distraction. And then he comes in and uses his own, physicality and uses his own, martial arts techniques. And that kind of, the Batarang kind of highlights his, his physical side, how, usually in the origin stories, after his parents are killed and he, vows to avenge their deaths and he goes into training, that's what his, power is built off of, is his, training in all of the different martial arts and all of the sciences and all of his knowledge in that way. I think all of that kind of is combined into how the Batarang is used, whether it's just a metal, tool, or if it does extra, things. But in all, it's the Batarang and him, going head to head, the combat fighting, which is what I think a lot of fans like about Batman, is that he, is human and he built this certain thing and it's literally in the shape of the bat, of what he represents. I mean, he represents, the bat, which is a shadowy figure, and he wants to bring that fear into the hearts of anyone he's going up against. And literally seeing a bat flying at you if you're the opponent, I mean, that's a really good representation of that. So I think out of all of the gadgets, I mean, they've had who's and different stories where they've broken down all of the things that are in the utility belt, which have been in like the 50s, like numbered so many. But the Batarang is pretty much the, tool that he uses. And I think that's why, because it's a representation of him and what he represents as a hero.
Does he ever, like, there's been some costumes where he doesn't actually have a utility belt, is that right?
Right.
And where it's assumed that he then carries the Batarangs in the cape? Or?
Pretty much, because that's where they kind of descend from. He'll kind of reach his arm back and then just kind of throw them. So, you don't see the little pockets that are in there.
Right.
And that's not really explained, but of course he always has them on him. So sometimes you can literally see that it's folded and he puts it in the utility belt, besides the kind of exaggerated look at the Batarang where it's, a pretty huge prop, yet you always see Adam West, when he needs it to go grappling up a building, he goes into his utility belt and then it's 3 times the size of what the utility belt can hold. And then, he does his thing. So yeah, you don't really see it really coming. You don't see it where it descends from, but it could be from the utility belt, it can be from the cape,
Right.
and it depends on the size and what it does, and yeah, it's all from the artist's interpretation.
And so you now have mentioned Adam West, and we talked about some other incarnations of Batman where he may or may not have the belt, but which also brings me to the point about what you were talking to me about earlier, about the significance and the fact that it's something that has transcended all the various Batman incarnations.
Right. It still was, in the comics, even throughout the 80s, but then once the Batman film started with Tim Burton's 89 film with Michael Keaton as Batman and Jack Nicholson as Joker, and that movie itself, was a blockbuster, and it pretty much created the superhero genre in film. It's not just, a Batman movie that, it just happened. It introduced a lot of new people to this character that since the 60s, with Adam West, didn't know about. And it pretty much, it was kind of like it was a foldable metal bat symbol. So he could fold it and he could put it in his utility belt, even if, you didn't see him always taking it out, and it still was there. And you can place it into, in small places, and you saw it, not as just, something to throw at a target. It was thrown at enemies. You could see it that it would hit their hand or it hit their leg, or he would try to knock out something out of their hand. He kind of used it in a tactical sense, but it was still just the regular metal shaped bat. There weren't any special tech or anything. It was kind of based off of, what the 40s and 50s had, which of course that film, with its, film noir type of feel, would definitely call back to, Finger and Gardner's original creation. And so the movies still continued, and what kind of changed was actually in 1992's Batman Returns, which brought back Michael Keaton, and it had Michelle Pfeiffer as Catwoman. And what was new about the Batarang was that it became remote controlled. When he had to go up against the Penguin, he pretty much planned it where, even though it's kind of almost ridiculous how he planned to hit everyone in kind of almost in this circle shape, and then he pretty much guided it's like a remote control car. Right. He guided the Batarang to hit all of the targets that he planned on his thing.
I don't remember that scene.
And that's the first time you kind of really see the Batarang kind of coming out of, just the regular, just out of metal. It's something different. And since then, the Batarang kind of has a more a designer-friendly history, and it really comes in the films and the animated series too. Even in Batman Forever, you get two types of Batarangs. You have the regular Batman and the rope, where the Batarang and the rope, and it's tied to it, and he throws it onto the side of a building, or he even takes out some of Two-Face's, men, just throwing it, and it gets in their leg, and they drag them away. And then you have, it's another tech one. It's a sonar Batarang.
That's in Batman Forever?
That's in Batman Forever, which is in 1995. It has Jim Carrey as the Riddler, Tommy Lee Jones as
Who's the Batman in that one? Is that Val Kilmer?
Yeah, Val Kilmer, yeah.
Okay.
That was the only one he was Batman in. And I like all of the Joel Schumacher ones. I know everyone always gets on it with that one, and then Batman and Robin, which we'll talk about. But they call back to, I think, kind of the camp of the 1960s. And I know it was such a drastic change from Tim Burton to Joel Schumacher. It's just the dark and light was just, I think that's what kind of threw fans off. But it still had the same type of mythology, and it still showed the type of characters that Two-Face and Joker were, and and how Riddler was. But you got to see the sonar Batarang, which was the thing that took out Riddler's kind of mind control device that he had in his Enigma tech, it was like a super box, and he pretty much threw it, and it shattered the whole thing and messed up the entire system. So he had a sonar batarang that matched the sonar suit that he would pretty much break into the system and destroy Riddler's plan. So still, even though it was something he just threw right at the tech, it was effective enough to take down, the main bad guy. And in Batman and Robin, the next one, which has George Clooney as Batman, you don't really see any batarangs, but you do get a nice shot of a whole wall of them, which kind of calls back to the Detective Comics issue we discussed earlier, the 100 batarangs of Batman, which that film in itself, was just an homage to the Silver Age comics anyway. So yeah, you don't see it in use, but you do see it as he has a range of different types of batarangs. And, it's just the batarang, and that just shows, even though he doesn't use it in the film, that it's just part of his mythos. It's part of who he is and what he does and how
you can't deny it's screen time at some point, right? You got to put it on there.
Exactly.
It's that important. Where
right.
No matter, so with regards to films, does Batman continue to use the batarang?
Yeah, and even in the recent, I guess the Christopher Nolan trilogy that started with Batman Begins in 2005. I mean, I think what was most interesting was that you actually get to see Christian Bale, who was Batman, create the batarangs himself and actually molding it and seeing it. And it kind of just shows the process of how he's becoming the hero that he wants to be. And even though he's had, it was a training with Ra's al Ghul, and, it was really focused more just on how he's, he uses his martial arts skills and everything. It's still a simple bat-shaped thing, and it was more as a diversion to then, use his skills in fighting. So you still see the batarang then, and even in, and you don't see the batarang really in the next movie, The Dark Knight, that came out in 2008, that had Heath Ledger as Joker, the sequel. But in the promotional posters, you saw Batman holding the batarang in his hand. You don't see it actually in use, but you still, it's still connected to him. It's still such an important part of him that even if he doesn't use it, it's still included into showing that this is who Batman is. And I think the best way that the batarang was represented was in the third film that came out in 2012, The Dark Knight Rises, when he has the batarangs that are shaped just like the kind of sleek emblem that, the Nolanverse brought. He throws them, and they're kind of like almost tranquilizing darts. It kind of takes him out. He throws them, and it hits, Bane's henchmen that are on the ice, and, it knocks them out. And so you already know that there's something extra to that than just, a weapon. And I think even with the new Batman films that'll come out, in this new cinematic universe, that he'll, of course, have a batarang. I don't see why he wouldn't. And I'm curious to see if they're going to develop more, designs with it, or just kind of keep it just as simple as, just a metal-shaped bat.
Another thing to kind of anticipate. I mean, I've never, I'm anticipating seeing Batman and Superman on the screen together.
Right.
I never realized how actually I'm also anticipating to see what the new Batarang is going to be,
Right. And especially if he goes up against Superman, and people, I guess, are trying to figure how he's going to fight such a strong character. And, you can look at different, story arcs, especially people are looking to Dark Knight Returns, since the style of Batman's suit is based off of that comic. People probably are automatically going to, somehow they're going to introduce kryptonite, and he could have kryptonite batarangs, which actually have existed before in Superman, Batman comics.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's just each thing, it's like he's prepping for whatever he has to do. And I mean, if he has to go up against Superman, he could have something attached to the Batarang that could knock him out, which we don't know necessarily yet what's his weakness in this cinematic universe. Of course, it probably will be kryptonite because that's his weakness just in every other
That's
incarnation.
his universal,
That's
right.
his universal weakness in pretty much every incarnation, but it would be interesting to see how they introduce that if they do, and if Batman will use that against them in their big fight, however long or how much that will happen. But yeah, I'm interested to see how.
I think it'd have to be a surprise attack because couldn't Superman just blow it away?
That's the thing. I mean, I'm always really I'm thoughtful to the people that follow the page because, you know, we just love Batman. Of course, we want him to win and we think he can beat anybody and anything. But, you know, I like to say I try to be as realistic about my fiction as possible.
Yes.
And
I like that.
and I know what Batman is capable of and I know what Superman is capable of. And it depends on if it's a surprise attack or if he has prep time and even then that might not be enough. It's just, it depends on what the situation is pretty much.
I gotcha. Well, that's exciting actually. Now, I by the way, I've always rooted for Batman too. And I'm not saying that just because you're here. It was my first superhero that I loved when I was a kid. I mean, I love Daredevil now. Daredevil has been my favorite since 5th grade, but before that, it was Batman.
It was Batman. And I think Batman has that appeal because he is alongside Superman and Wonder Woman and the Flash and Green Lantern and all of these characters that are literally out of this universe, but at the end of the day, he's still human and has human emotions, and I think that's what connects people to Batman.
And I think most kids want to throw a boomerang shaped as a bat before they ever get to shoot lasers out of their eyes. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Anyway.
It's almost more attainable, even if you want to do that.
Absolutely.
I mean, than superpowers. You know, everyone wants superpowers, but if you can make it yourself, right. I think that's even better.
No, it is definitely one of the allures of Batman. So tell me a little bit about the Batarang in the cartoon world. And there's multiple cartoon worlds, so I'm sure.
So many cartoon worlds. And actually, you get to see that flourish in the later DCAU. But the Batarang, even in the opening credits of Batman the Animated Series that started in 1992, the first, I guess, you know, cartoon that was within the DC animated universe. In the opening credits, you know, it's in that dark deco, you know, design that Bruce Timm has. Everyone's in the shadows, but Batman throws out a Batarang and knocks out both the henchmen's guns out of their hand, like bam, bam, right next to each other. And even then, so in every intro, in every episode you watch of the animated series, you already have a sense of the Batarang. You know, you just see that it's this figure that's the shape of a bat, and it just knocked out those two guys. And it's like you knocked out the guns, and then he goes into, you know, fighting them, you know, fist fight, and just what pretty much the kind of raw, you know, ability that he has to just, you know, beat his opponent. And you don't really see it as a weapon, like he throws it and it knocks out the person. It's more of a diversion. He knocks out the guns. He hits a button on the wall. He uses it to grapple from one building to another. And it's not used so heavily, but the fact that it's in the opening credits, I think already, you know, illustrates that it's an important part of him, because you see the Batmobile in the opening credits, and you see, you know, the Gotham City blimp, and you see all of these things that are kind of representing Gotham and Batman, and that's already in it. And once you pretty much go through the 1990s with the animated series, you go to series such as the Justice League, you know, where he's with, you know, all of, you know, the Justice League and Superman and Wonder Woman. And he at times has one that's called like a razor Batarang, and he'll use it, and it's pretty much just a really sharp object, and he just throws it at his opponent and it kind of knocks him out. And then in another Justice League episode, he has the electric Batarang, which was actually used in comics around the same time in the story Batman Hush. The electric Batarang was used, I think it's in Batman 618, I think it's from 2003. And he uses it against Clayface, who was in the form of Jason Todd. And it's an electric Batarang, and he throws it into his leg, and it pretty much shocks him, and it takes him out. But yeah, I think in the animated, versions, they kind of played a little bit with the design, kind of added a little bit more tech, because especially in the Justice League, he's surrounded by all of these gods and, these superpower beings that he has to kind of up his,
Up his game.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that's why the animators of that kind of added that kind of mystique to something so simple at first, but it can do wonders when you work on it.
Right. Where, what about Batman Beyond? Was there a Batarang there?
There was a Batarang there. It was in the kind of more the traditional shape, but I think with Batman Beyond and even the Batman, which came out a few years after in 2004, it just looked high tech, like in the Batman, it kind of had a blue hue around it, and you kind of would hear like a humming, like it was electric. It kind of had that charge to it. And in Batman Beyond, he had a Batarang as well. And speaking of that, all of the Batman family at one point or another have their own Batarangs. And I think that's why it's funny in that Teen Titans comic where he's like, our budget for Batarangs is pretty high. Batgirl has her own Batarang, and Nightwing has his own Batarangs, and Tim Drake as Red Robin had little R's that matched, and even Oracle, she keeps a Batarang on her just in case she needs to use it.
You mentioned the R's for Robin?
Yes.
Very into branding.
Exactly. So, and I mean, even with that, when you see that R flying, you know exactly who you're going up against. Just like when you see the bat flying towards you and you're going up against him, you're going up against Batman.
It's pretty amazing. So, where in, can I take you to comics real quick?
Sure.
So, where is the Batarang now in comics? Where are we at? What is he usually using it for? And what are some recent, maybe, stories
recently,
involving it?
Yeah, in particular, it's been used. It's pretty much still been used in and even in Batman and Robin. He uses it in the New 52, and it's even in one comic. I think it was Batman and Robin 13. I think it came out about a year ago when he almost used it as he had 3 in his hand and he was going up against Robin. And it almost looked like, if you can picture it, how Wolverine has like those claws. It's kind of like he had 3 in his hand, and it's pretty much used in defense. It's not as much as a distraction, but he does do more combat, I think, in these comics, which I like. It's the physicality of it is best. But you do see the Batarang. You see all of the same tools and gadgets that he uses, but the Batarang, I think, is more sleek. It's longer. It's kind of, like I said, the design, it depends on the artist, and yeah, the Batarang is still very prevalent, even in the comics, Batman, Detective Comics, Batman and Robin, whichever he's featured in, and it's still kind of used in the same way. It can be used in combat, or it can be used as a diversion, and I think what it's used for has kind of stayed consistent throughout the 75 plus years, but just the way that it looks and the capabilities that it has, I think, has evolved with time, and I think that's what's so fascinating about it.
Right. What about video games? Is it got a place there?
Definitely, especially in the Batman Arkham world. You get a huge range of different types of Batarangs. You get an explosive Batarang, and you get just it's kind of like the Razor Batarang, and you get electric Batarangs that you can use to fight, in your hand and still use it while you're, fighting, the opponent. and there's like a reverse Batarang, and a lot, and even some of the Batarangs are kind of still bring back that boomerang effect, how he throws it, and you know, whether you need to hit a button on the door to open up a secret lair, or you need to hit Bane in the leg, or you need to, you know, whatever it is, the Batarang's actually really important. And the designers of the game, I think out of all of the things, they expanded a lot on using that, but just making it so high-tech and crazy, you know, that pretty much, you know, I need, you know, like from the explosive gel to just all of the things that you can use, you know, going through wherever you are, whether it was in Arkham Asylum or you're in Arkham City, or you're going through Gotham and Arkham Origins. And I think they'll do the same with Arkham Knight that comes out next month, which I'm so pumped about. And especially since you get to drive the Batmobile, I'm sure all of his, you know, I'm sure the tech in there is going to be insane. They might even go further than what they've already done.
So you may not be doing anything for a while other than playing that video game.
That's usually what happens when they come out. Like for that weekend or a week, you know, I might be sick.
Yeah.
And I might have to stay home.
So it's very interesting, and I guess pretty logical when you think about it. It's just how each different media pushes the next.
Exactly.
You know? It continues to evolve and kind of build off each other. And when you have a game like you talked about, they can actually develop the tech or come up with all these ideas, because clearly one of his best weapons in a video game is his long-range attack.
Exactly.
And so then the comics and everyone else can kind of use that,
right,
to build off and make another story about.
Definitely.
Or include in the story.
Right. Especially, yeah, with film and with the video games and, you know, just all of the tech, even that, you know, we use today. It's just technology is just, you know, evolving itself outside of the comics. And so I'm sure the creators pull from that. And I think the Batarang will just keep going. It'll keep becoming something greater and greater. And, you know, it might turn into something that's microscopic, but then when you throw it, you know, it can still be long range, and it can still, you know, the shape of it and what it can do, I think will still keep progressing. And that's the thing. Even though it'll still change, Batman and the Batarang are kind of like as one. They're something that go together.
I think that probably the Batmobile.
Right, that, the Batmobile, and the Batcave. I think those three you know, things are what people think of when they think of Batman, even if they don't even know much about Batman.
No, I think you're right.
I
think you're right. So, can you tell me your most memorable Batarang use in a comic book? Something that really sticks with you that
I think it would have to be in Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns, when he has, you know, the symbol itself, which I know people have seen now because of Ben Affleck's suit, is kind of a more fatter kind of emblem. It's a little thicker. My favorite is when he tracks down Joker and he throws it and it goes directly into Joker's eye. That visually is still crazy even when I look at it today, because it's so, I don't know, it's so violent, kind of gory in a sense, but the fact that it's such a simple object, but it can be so pretty much lethal. You know, and it's pretty much just symbolically Batman is in Joker's head, which is pretty much like he is all the time. So it's almost like a visual aspect of that. So I think that's a cool one. Yeah.
What about film or TV or the animated series? And if you've got multiples, I mean, they're fascinating. So
I think still just for me, because I'm a huge fan of Batman the Animated Series, the 92 to 95, and just throughout the 90s, that's just still my favorite, because that was the first cartoon Batman I saw. Even though it's not used so heavily, when you would see the opening, that's just the opening, and then with, you know, Danny Elfman's theme, and just the whole, how it all comes together, how the Batarang is used. It just, even though it's on there for 3 seconds, but it's still just like,
it's iconic.
It's iconic. It makes it so memorable, even if you don't, you know, necessarily like the series as much as others, or watch it as much, you always remember that opening.
That defining moment.
Yeah.
What about it? Do the movies have a Batarang defining moment?
I am a huge fan, personally, of the Dark Knight Rises because Bane is my favorite villain. So I'm being very biased. But I did like the way that he used the Batarang pretty much as knockout darts and just kind of took out everybody, like 10 people in a matter of 5 seconds. I thought that was pretty cool because you really don't see the Batarang in that Nolan verse. But with those, it was a big defining moment because he knocks out the people, and then Batman comes back from being gone, in the pit, and he's been gone for months and the city is in chaos, and then he comes back with these little Batarang darts, and then he's all lighted up, and then it's just, it pretty much is, it introduced his return back to the city, and to stop Bane and all of that, and it was just with those little darts, with those little tiny Batman Batarang darts, and so I think those were most memorable for me.
Bane is your favorite over Joker?
Yes.
Ooh, that might be a show in itself.
I could definitely do that. I'd be more hyped than I am right now talking about Batarangs.
What? Then put that down, write that down.
Okay.
And I mean, because I want to hear that. Because I do think for some people, Bane's introduction as, when he broke Batman's back.
Right.
In the comics.
Right.
People do. I mean, Joker's crazy, but Bane broke his back.
He literally broke him. And he didn't just break him physically. I mean, it depends on which, incarnation you look at, but in the comics in Batman Nightfall in the early 90s, he systematically broke him mentally and physically and pretty much planned it out so perfectly, and then came and then literally broke him. And I kind of was introduced to him through the animated series first, even though it's funny, he's the villain that's been in there the least. He's only in technically one episode in the first animated series. Right. It's just in the episode Bane.
Oh, all right.
Okay, we're getting totally off topic, and I apologize.
No, that's awesome. Because I now know, and I can't wait for that next show when we talk about Bane. Maybe not the next show, but put that in.
But soon, definitely.
Cue that one up.
Definitely.
All right. What about a video game? Do you have an iconic video game Batarang that you've used or seen?
Probably in the Batman Arkham series, Arkham Asylum is still my favorite. I know everyone loves Arkham City, and I'm sure they're going to love Arkham Knight, and I'm excited for it. But, yeah, I really liked anything explosive or anything kind of electric. And he has about like 3 or 4 different types of Batarangs, and you can choose which one you want for whatever situation you think deems it worthy. But, yeah, I really like the explosive and the reverse Batarang, and pretty much just how it's designed, where he throws it, then it goes into slow motion and you see it hit each person and then come back. It's just, I think the whole the theatrics of it, and how they kind of show him throwing it and then it goes in slow motion, and then you see what you just did in slow-mo, then it comes back. I think it's just how it's presented. It's just fun.
So I can assume what an explosive Batarang is. What's a reverse Batarang?
A reverse Batarang, pretty much, it's almost kind of like the boomerang, but they just don't call it that, because all the other Batarangs, some of them just stay, like especially if you throw it at a door and then, it might electrocute the system and then it'll unlock it, or an explosive one goes and then it just goes boom. Reverse, you kind of just throw it and it comes back to them. So I think it's kind of like the new modern way of calling it a boomerang, but not calling it a boomerang.
The reverse Batarang.
The reverse Batarang, which is cool.
It sounds cool. So is there anything that I'm missing here on Batarangs that you want to educate me on, or actually the audience on? Because I think we covered a ton.
Yeah, I think the most important thing you kind of get from it is that the Batarang is probably his main choice of a weapon besides himself as a weapon. And it's been designed and introduced in all media, which you can't really say that for a lot of the things you may see in comics. In comics, you may see a gadget that he uses in only one, and you'll never see it again. But the Batarang is kind of like, almost, like I said, synonymous with Batman, just as the Batmobile is and just as the Batcave is. Even if you're not sure, what those represent for Batman and his history, you know that Batman has tons and tons of Batarangs, and that's what he uses in pretty much any fight or any, thing that he has to do. And it's just part of the foundation of what Batman represents. He represents, being human, and he represents, knowledge and being able to build something that replaces, all the superpowers that you see in all the other comics, and just has this one simple thing that can be totally designed to be extraordinary.
Amazing. I love it. I'm a new fan of the Batarang. There is no doubt that I have a much better appreciation going into this, or now, since you've talked about it. I mean, that, I have to say, Londyn, again, it's fascinating how the wealth of knowledge and the research that you've done is just fantastic. So
thank you.
Thank you. I know you love doing it. It's not like anyone's asking you to do it. You love doing it, but it should be recognized as something pretty awesome. So thank you. So with that, any news in the Batman world you want to discuss? I think now was a good time to maybe talk about that.
There's been a few things that happened this week. I think probably the number one that's still being talked about right now is the Suicide Squad cast. The cast photo came out, all of them costumed. And of course, for us Bat fans, we have been waiting to see what Harley Quinn looks like. And there has been, of course, the spectrum of responses from fans. I think, and I mean, this is for me too, since I love the animated series, and that's where Harley Quinn was created by Paul Dini and designed by Bruce Timm, that we would love to see that original incarnation. But just the fact that it's going from animation on TV to live action, it's kind of hard to modernize her look. I mean, not everyone can, rock a onesie and a jester costume. It's kind of hard to do that, I think, in live action. But, her, how Margot Robbie looked, from the set pictures and from just the cast photo, it calls to her New 52 look and the comics that come from there, and also even in the Batman Arkham world when she's in Arkham Asylum and Arkham City, just the kind of, it's a very modern punk look. And I think people kind of even see that with the promotional photo that we see of Jared Leto as Joker, where, he has the tattoos and, it's very kind of, for a lot of people, it's not what they expected of Joker, but looking at the ensemble cast, that's just a kind of modern punk kind of feel it has to it. And I even talked about on the Instagram page that Bruce Timm, who created Harley Quinn, who designed her, he gave a reaction to her, and he is being optimistic. He says, "I'm optimistic. I thought it was really cool." And he even said, "I was worried that it was going to be, quote unquote, a little skanky, but I think that what they're doing is good so far." So for me, being a huge Bruce Timm fan just in general, I would trust that if the creator is okay with how she looks right now, then I should be okay with it too. And it's so early. The movie doesn't come out till August 5th, 2016, so it's over a year away. And, we're getting all these little snippets and all these little pictures and things like that. But I think we just kind of have to wait and see. Right. But so far, I'm totally, like I said, I have a very open mind about movies and where it goes. And I definitely think people are still talking about it. Some people don't like it, but some people love it. And I think that's just with any type of superhero.
Any superhero thing you're going to get. I mean, I love the new being a Daredevil fan. I love the new Daredevil show. I thought Kingpin was fantastic. Mm-hmm. And I've now starting to hear, I think Vincent D'Onofrio overacted and he wasn't that good. So,
and I heard that people weren't happy with the costume in the end.
Right. I mean, listen, no one's going to be happy 100% of the time.
100% of the time.
Or
exactly.
I guess not everyone's going to be happy 100% of the time. So,
But
well, I guess I'll be interested to hear your thoughts as they keep on releasing new information.
Right, definitely. And also, I don't know how many people are really into it, but Fox's show, live action show Gotham, had its season finale on Monday this week. And I thought it was pretty explosive, and I really enjoyed it. And I think, whether or not I liked how certain characters acted, in the end was the best part of the entire season so far, is because Alfred and Bruce discover an underground cavern that you can hear flapping bats in the background, and they pretty much introduce the Batcave. And even though he's young and he's not going to be Batman next season, just the fact that they introduced that part of his mythology, which, like I said, is synonymous with Batman, and everyone was waiting for something. And he's not going to be in the suit, and he's not going to be driving a car because he's too young to drive a car, and he's not going to, have all of these gadgets and stuff, but he has the place where he's pretty much probably going to build into the hero that we're all awaiting for him to see.
He could start practicing with a boomerang.
Exactly. You never know. He could start making those down there and make his own workshop. You never know.
Yeah.
So I thought that the Gotham finale was actually pretty good. It kind of tied up certain loose ends, but then is leaving you wondering, what's he going to do with finding this cavern? And then, Penguin pretty much turns into, the so-called ruler of the criminal underground in Gotham. And so how long is that going to last? And you see kind of the Riddler. Well, he's not the Riddler right now. He's still Edward Nygma and works with the GCPD. You see that he's kind of snapping and he's turning into that kind of psychotic mind that he already has. But you see each character kind of transforming into the characters that we know them now. So I'm excited to see when the next season starts.
So bottom line is you're enjoying Gotham.
I am enjoying Gotham. I know a lot of people are thrown off with the age, but I think just as a whole, if you're a fan of just Batman, I think it's something to look into if you haven't watched it yet.
Right. There's a lot. I mean, hey, let it build and accept it for what it is. I think would be your advice, right?
Exactly, yes.
Any other Batman news?
I think pretty much everyone is still just really excited for Batman Arkham Knight, the final game in the Batman Arkham series, to be released June 23rd next month. And
who's the game company for that one?
Rocksteady came back. I know people had a problem with Warner Brothers Montreal doing Arkham Origins, but for the first game, Arkham Asylum, and the second game, Arkham City, Rocksteady Studios was, the design, and they're coming back to do the final one, and they're introducing Batgirl, which was kind of news. She's going to be part of, she's going to be, I think, a downloadable character. And it's interesting to try to figure out which Batgirl she is, because Oracle is in the series, and that's Barbara Gordon. And everyone knows Barbara Gordon is Batgirl. So are we going to see Stephanie Brown? Are we going, it's just kind of interesting to see the people that are going to be in the game and just more of what we're supposed to expect. So I think just on that front, everyone's just excited and just waiting to play the game.
Super.
See new Batarang.
Yeah, that's awesome. That is fantastic. So why don't we talk about what you're going to talk about next week?
Okay. It's something that I've talked about before with the followers on Instagram, and I always find it to be a fascinating topic because just like, the Batmobile and Batman are pretty much one, a concept for Batman that he doesn't kill or he doesn't use guns is probably one of the most famous elements in knowing who Batman is, and that pretty much wasn't the case for his 75 years. I mean, he's used guns and he's killed people, and I think that's always something interesting to explore because Batman is such a dynamic character and has changed and evolved throughout the years that there are parts of history that even if you may not consider it, something you like, it's part of his history, and kind of we're going to explore his guns and killing history and kind of how it went from him being the dark Pulp Fiction mass vigilante that had a gun pretty much in every golden age start in his first year, 1939, 1940s, early 40s, to becoming the more, you use your wit and your resources and your knowledge, and he was very anti-gun, anti-kill. So we're going to talk about that.
Fantastic.
In our next episode.
And so if the listeners have questions for you or suggestions or requests on what they might want to hear you talk about, where and how can they reach you?
The easiest way to reach me is if you email me at historyofthebatman@gmail.com. I will for sure get everyone's responses. If you have a question or if you want me to talk about a Batman-related topic that you really think would be a great episode, I am very open to suggestions. And of course, if you just want to send in your request over Instagram at instagram.com/historyofthebatman, or on Facebook at facebook.com/historyofthebatman, or even on Twitter at HIST, HIST of the Batman, then I'm definitely all in. But the easiest way definitely is email, and I can't wait to hear from you guys.
Awesome. All right, well, let's wrap it up tonight, and I want to thank you again for taking the time to share all this wonderful information. Listeners, hope you have a good rest of your day, evening, or whatever time you're listening to this. And just want to thank you once again. We've got our main man here producing and engineering the show now, Mason Booker. He actually did it the first 2 episodes as well. We want to make sure he gets proper credit because he is really hooking this up for us. So thank you, Mason. Anyways, this has been the History of the Batman with Londyn, brought to you by Meltdown Comics and Collectibles. See you next week.